Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. In this video I will give you the third and final part of my guide, focusing this time on the 3 turns farming compositions. If you haven't watched part 1 and part 2 of this guide, I will link them in the description below. In part 1 I've given you a detailed overview of the event, covering the gacha seas and the limited servants on rate up, an analysis on the Lotto sea and in particular on the event lottery, checking how it compares to the coming Summer 6 event when it comes to farming, and finally an overview of all the best free quests covering rotation, enemy classes and materials. Part 2 focused instead on farming efficiency, covering golden apples management, the increase in farming efficiency with each new rotation, a detailed analysis on how the level 90 single nodes compare to the level 90 plus mixed nodes when it comes to both shop currency farming and, more importantly, Lotto currency farming. There you can find an in-depth guide to Lotto sea drops, ascension materials, Kupi farming and bond farming. Basically, part 1 and part 2 are the theory, the 5 W's that are needed in order to use efficiently this practice manual that I'm going to give you in this third part of the guide. Let me give you some important premises before we start looking at the farming setups. First of all, I will put in the description below some of the best resources for this lottery. Saber of Avalon has made his usual spreadsheet where you can find a lot of different compositions for all farming nodes. This is probably the resource with the cleanest presentation. But if instead you prefer numbers when it comes to different farming compositions and video demonstrations, you can check Rat Archive in the wiki, which cover a very large amount of possible farming compositions. Keep in mind that this archive lacks some details about each composition, for example regarding damage and NP level required, making a lot of farming composition just theoretical for whales with MP5 DPS at level 120. And even then you may need RNG for face cards, so use them with a grain of salt. Following these considerations, I have 2 aims for this guide. One is to select the best farming composition among the sea of possible ones and present them to you in an orderly manner, ranking them from best to worst. That way, as soon you'll find a setup that you can run, you can stop there and you are done, knowing you are being as much efficient as possible. And 2 is to give you an idea on how to modify the farming setups you'll find here or in the other resources, specifying for example the weak point of the enemies you will find, the troublemakers in each node about which you need to be careful, as well as the strong and weak points of the best possible DPS advised for each node. This is for sure the most important part, since it will let you create your own farming composition here and in the future. Since the spreadsheet was made ahead of time for this lottery, I have decided to change the usual layout of my presentation in order to leave more space in each comp for my consideration regarding the ranking, the DPS used and the possible alternatives, just as I explained a minute ago. Be careful however, since even if they may appear the same, I have modified some of the setups compared to the spreadsheet. In particular, check NP level, skill levels and append skill level. That's because I have checked the numbers with my usual assumptions, which you can find on the screen right now. This is to keep things consistent with my usual farming guides, which you should be accustomed to. For example, you know that I don't like comps with RNG, in particular crits comp, even if they have a certain appeal for a lot of players, or that I don't like comps that require high MP levels, being a poor free-to-player myself. Since we are on the subject of my past farming guides, the ranking rules used for this one remain the same, with just some extra considerations since this is a lottery event. In particular, you will only find 6 slot setups when it comes to event drop bonus in this guide, since 5 slot setups are very easy to figure out, in particular with the new Buster meta. So my ranking for the comps will focus on party cost. By that I mean that I will evaluate in order the following points. Usually I will start checking if the comp require a maximum broken Lotto C or a base one, but in this case, since we have no starting MP charge and no pure attack stat, basically having a maximum broken C doesn't make much of a difference. You can get a bit more damage and refund, but it's usually not required. In any case, after farming for a while, you should have at least one matchly unbroken copy of the Lotto C. So, the most important criterion I've used is the servant rarity in the party, aka the less stars the better. For example, if you can use 2 4-star DPS in the front line, then you can bring any 4-star of choice in the back slot for bond farming. And as I explained in part 2 of this guide, lottery events are one of the main ways to level up bonds for your servants, in order to get more quartz for the coming summer banners or more coins for a pen skill and grailing past level 100. For the next criterion, I will check if the comp require double supports, aka double Artoria, double Koyan and so on. I will rank higher setups that don't require double support, since they are accessible to more players. Next, I will check if append skills, aka mana loading, are required, how many of them and how many lores are required. Finally, I will list first comps that use a permanent DPS in the gacha, and afterwards those requiring limited DPS. Keep in mind I said I will evaluate these criteria in order, so I will only move over to check the following criterion if the previous one is the same among 2 farming comps. If all previous criteria I've mentioned are the same, then the DPS servants in the same rank will be listed in order of decrease in damage. Before we start with the farming setups, just some final considerations that you should keep in mind. First of all, regarding the new Buster meta, this is definitely its first time to shine, with crit comps in the first rotation, Melusine for the second one, and Caster Q for the third and final rotation. However, aside the particular case that is Caster Q, you will see in the farming comps that Artoria is still the best choice when it comes to farming this lottery. So don't worry, Art's meta is still going strong. Basically, Caster Q is the only Buster servant that can 6-slot farm with a considerable lower party cost compared to other arts options, since when it comes to Melusine comps there are arts compositions that are cheaper. However, remember that Caster Q rank up is locked behind Lost Level 6, so it may not be available to you at the moment. Similarly, Albatross can be a strong option for this lottery, being basically an Arash with a much bigger MP charge, but even with a much bigger party cost. However, just like Caster Q, she is locked behind Lost Level 6 completion, and having enough friend points saved up. Friend points should really not be a problem, since you can get them from this lottery. The problem is the recent release of Lost Level 6. The second consideration I want to make regards Oberon. He will be extremely useful in this event, as both a support with big NP charge and strong buffs, as well as a wave clearer. However, you must be very careful when using his third skill, especially if you are trying some unusual comp, maybe using a lower MP level for your DPS than what it's advised to clear the room, or trying some crit comps in order to level up some mystic codes and having one more free slot in the black line for bond farming. In all these cases, remember to check if the damage is enough to kill with MP only, even with a mineral. Otherwise, you are risking needing a lot of turns in order to clear that node, with your supports doing all the damage since your main DPS is permanently asleep. In other words, Oberon is a fantastic option but need to be used carefully. As a final note before we start, I won't bother to list explicitly the looping farming composition for the level 90 single nodes, since they work the usual way. For Arts, DPS plus double Artoria, and for Buster, double Koyan plus Oberon. So I will only rank the best DPS and the best supports, noting for example for each one if order change is needed or not. If you want the details, you can check the spreadsheet or the rat archive for all the farming comps, but I repeat, they are basically the same. Let's start then with round 1, taking a look at the Monarch level 90 single node. Among the 3 level 90 single nodes for this event, this is definitely the most difficult one to 3 turns loop, and that's mainly due to the ruler in room 3. This ruler promotes the use of Berserker DPS, since they only need to deal around 100k neutral damage in room 3 in order to clear it. Your second best option are extra class servants, since compared to Lancers they have usually better buffs to compensate for their lack of class advantage and higher hidden class damage multiplier. In both cases you'll need to reach 160k neutral damage in room 3. Among the primary DPS, first place goes to Summer Musashi, since she can loop without order change and with a lot of different mystic codes. In second place we have Space Sister that can loop without plug suit, but it's more limited when it comes to mystic codes. In third place I will put Melusine thanks to her absurd damage with double Koyan and Oberon, requiring however order change and 1 extra support. There are other Lancers that can loop, like Melt, Percival and Parvati, and even other extra options like Okusai that can exploit the main trait on Helena in room 3, but all of them require high MP levels and order change. Of course, the top support is Artoria, she always will be, but in second place we can see Oberon over Tamamo. His total buffs are usually lower for arts comps compared to Tamamo, but the 70% NP charge really helps a lot of unit loop. Moving on to the level 90 plus mixed node for round 1, in my opinion this is the second easiest one to farm. Yeah, party cost is usually higher than round 2 and round 3, but here we have a lot more option for damage given the Berserker's enemies, and we also have the option of crit comps thanks to them. In fact, the single Berserker in room 1 is very easy to crit, especially if you are using the new Buster support that is Koyanskaya with her star bombs, while the Saber in room 3 has many traits we can exploit, like Divine, Demonic, Riding, Dragon, Giant and Sky Attribute. If only Archer Nobu had an MP charge, she is basically the perfect counter to Ibuki. Anyway, there are mainly 3 ways to farm this node. Number 1, you can use a single target DPS with a big NP charge, looping in room 1 and room 2, with an AoE DPS clearing room 3. Number 2, you can use a single target Arch DPS, looping in all 3 rooms, together with a semi-support with AoE NP that can clear the remaining mobs in room 3. Number 3, you can use an AoE Art DPS that can loop in room 1 and room 3, with a single target semi-support that can deal with room 2. I have listed these options in this order because that's exactly the same order in which the corresponding farming composition resulted in the ranking, which you can see on the screen for a quick overview. Starting with the best 6-slot setup in my opinion of Gilgamesh, Cersei, Artoria and Oberon. This one requires no double support or DPS, no append skills, it has the lowest party cost with Cersei being a 4-star servant, And in all room you'll have the Buster first card bonus for face carding the remaining HPs if needed. For primary DPS, Gilgamesh has the best damage in room 3 and can buff the secondary DPS. Otherwise, other AoE archers with NP charge can work too. For example, Napoleon and Tesla has bonus damage in room 3 against Ibuki, otherwise you can use the permanent spook that is Arjuna, or even a rush, which in particular will keep your party cost low and won't have to deal with Oberon skill tree since it will die anyway after his NP. For secondary DPS, Cersei has the best NP charge, but needs NP 2 to clear room 2 consistently. Any face card will do the trick even with a min roll. When it comes to supports, Waver can replace Oberon, but one Lord Append and higher MP levels for both DPS will be required. The second best 6 slot is a variation of the previous one, with Sanzang instead of Cersei. Party cost is higher for this one and you need one Lord Append skill. However, it works at MP1 for both DPS. That's because Sanzang deals more damage than Cersei and can also buff the primary DPS. The drawback is that she requires one Lord Append given her smaller MP charge. Moving on with the good 6 slot setups, from this point party cost will be maxed with all 5-star servants. In particular, I ranked this one lower since it requires your own Castoria, and on top of that one Lord Append skill. However, it works at MP1 for all DPS and no face cards are required. Regarding the primary DPS, Artoria Archer has the best NP refund among all single target DPS in the game, and that's even without a self NP charge. Furthermore, she can also buff the secondary DPS damage with her skill tree. As a secondary DPS, Oberon can clear the lower HP mobs in room 3 while charging the primary DPS to help him or her loop in with Berserker low refund. The following setup is basically the same as the previous one with Vlad instead of Artoria. You could argue that this one should be ranked higher since Vlad is permanent, unlike Archer Artoria, but it can't buff Oberon damage like Archer Artoria with her skill tree. This extra damage could be needed, for example, if you can't lower Oberon skills, since he requires new materials and his rate up was not long ago. Vlad has basically the second best MP refund among all single target DPS in the game, also thanks to his NP charge, being on equal footing with Shitonai when it comes to NP refund. Shitonai can replace Vlad, but higher MP levels for both DPS, her and Oberon, are required to deal enough damage in room 3, since she lacks class advantage. Closing things, we have the bad 6 slot. I'm just pointing out now that best, good and bad are just my way to give you a ranking without using numbers, so if you hear me say bad or worst, it's just my way to give you the ranking. The setup will work, it's just worse than the previous one, even if by only a little bit. Anyway, I've ranked this one last because it requires, of course, your own Castoria and one Lord Append skill, but furthermore, NP2 for the primary DPS is advised, and even then, face cards may be required in room 2 and room 3. For primary DPS, Jean Archer with her good NP refund and big NP charge can loop in room 1 and room 3 and can also buff the secondary DPS. But she requires lowered append and NP2 to deal enough damage, and even then face cards may be required in room 3. Regarding the semi-support, Abigail can clear room 2 while buffing the damage and charging the primary DPS to help him/her loop over the single Berserker in room 1. It's the combination of self-NP charge, AoE charge per turn, strong party buff and single target MP that makes Abby the perfect choice for this type of comps. As a final note, Space Ishtar can replace Jeanne, but higher MP levels for her and Abby will be required in order to deal enough damage. Next on the list, as the worst 6-slot comps, we will have the crit comps, aka the farming setups that require to crit down the Berserker in room 1, following then with 2 NPs in room 2 and room 3. I won't list them since I don't like comps with RNG, but do note that they can be quite useful since they will let you level up a specific mystic code and even bring one more servant in the backline for bond farming. I should add that if you want to use crit comps, this first rotation is the best one, since you have the lowest possible RNG for face card in room 1, given that all the servants in your party will have class advantage against the Berserker. Moving on to the second round, let's first take a look at the level 90 single node. Looking at the layout of enemies, you could argue that this node is more difficult to loop compared to round 1, since we have only 2 enemies in room 2. However, remember that rider enemies have a higher MP refund, so in practice is not that much of a detriment. The real problem is that both Assassin and Alter Ego have class disadvantage in room 3, so once again, just like in round 1, Berserker or extra class servants are advised, for exactly the same reasons I have stated in round 1. In particular, Berserker will have to deal around 100k neutral damage in room 3, while Assassin and Alter Ego will have to deal around 160k neutral damage in room 3. Don't get me wrong, you can loop with some Assassin or Alter Ego like Koyan or Kiara, but they require both higher MP levels and Plug Suite. As a final note, given the low HP enemies in room 1, Abetroth can clear them with minimal damage support from your party, even at MP1, assuming of course you have already cleared Lost Bell 6 and you have rolled there in the friend points gacha, maybe during this lottery using the friend points from the Lotto boxes. The best primary DPS for this node is Space Ishtar, since she's the only one that can loop without order change. Then we have Summer Musashi and Summer Kiara that can loop with order change, dealing the most damage in room 3. In third place I have put Arjuna Alter and Morgan, since they can loop if you use Abetroth like I said to deal with room 1. Technically, if you have Abetroth, this setup may jump to first place, since they are overall cheaper. However, with Abetroth being locked behind Lost Bell 6, I feel like a lot of players won't be able to use these setups, since just like me, they may lack Lost Bell 6 completion. For supports, again, Castoria first place as always, followed by Oberon, whose MP charge can really help looping over the 2 enemies in room 2. And finally, in third place, Abetroth, since she can deal with room 1, enabling bastard looping comps. Moving on to the level 90 plus mixer node for round 2, I would say that this one is the most difficult one to farm given the enemy class and layout. It's just slightly more troublesome than round 1, but in practice we have equivalent farming composition when it comes to party cost, with maybe the exception of crit comps. In fact, the single archer mob in room 1 can be critted down, but to do it consistently you'll need double Lancer DPS and Oberon, so that your entire frontline will have class advantage. The other more troublesome part I mentioned before is the higher HP mob in room 2, which basically require a primary DPS to loop in room 2 and room 3, since buff stacking is needed to deal with it, so a secondary DPS won't deal enough damage. There are mainly 2 ways to farm this node that you will see in the coming farming compositions. Number 1 is to use an AoE DPS with big MP charge to loop all 3 rooms. Number 2 is to use a single target DPS clear room 1, while both buffing and charging the primary AoE DPS looping in room 2 and room 3. This time the 2 strategies will have mixed ranking, Sometimes number 1 will be better and some other times number 2 will be better, and you can get a quick overview of the rankings for primary DPS and secondary DPS by checking the left side of the screen. The best 6-slot setup, in my opinion, is the one using Summer Melt, Castoria, Bride and Oberon. It has the lowest party cost, with Melt being a 4-star servant. It requires no double support or DPS, and you'll have guaranteed crits for room 3 if needed for face cards. The only downside is the lowered append on Melt, meaning you'll need either NP2 or NP1 at bond 10. This just to be able to unlock an append skill. Again, last angle, I don't care about Summer Castoria and Summer Morgan, fix the coins instead of copy-pasting servants. Anyway, among primary DPS, Summer Melt has the best NP refund and NP charge combined. She can loop all 3 rooms with the largest number of different supports, but her damage is low, so higher NP levels are advised. Fortunately, she can guarantee a crit turn in room 3 for face cards if needed, thanks to her NP and Oberon's second skill. Melt can also work with secondary DPS working as semi-supports that will clear room 1. However, losing a dedicated full damage support requires very high MP level for Melt. The second best 6-slot uses this approach. In regards to the ranking, you could argue that this one could very well be 3rd place. The 2 main advantages are Percival being a permanent 4-star servant with a very recent rate-up, so even new players had a chance to get him, and not needing MP2 or Bond 10 in order to unlock his append skill. On the flip side, Abby is a niche semi-support when compared to the likes of Nero Bride, and since supports are kings in this game, I feel like most players will be more comfortable with first comp. And in any case, I wanted to give credit to the number of possible options that Melt has as primary DPS. In practice, compared to Melt, Percival has great NP refund but small NP charge, so he needs a secondary DPS to deal with room 1 and also help in loop over room 2. Fortunately, he can buff that secondary DPS and his buffs scale very well with Oberon, so damage is good even without a 3rd full dedicated support, unlike with Melt comps. Regarding Abby, she has AoE NP buff that scales very well with Oberon, self NP charge and NP regen for a looping ally, so she is basically the perfect semi-support to deal with room 1 for this node. Next, we have a good 6-slot setup that is a variation of the previous one. It's ranked lower since this one requires your own Castoria, and while Theon is a permanent old 4-star servant that probably already spooked you, precisely because he's permanent, you'll need NP2 Bond 9 or NP3 Bond 6 in order to unlock his append skill. In practice, Theon has the worst NP refund among all AoE Arts Lancers, so he needs both append unlocked at NP2 or above, as well as face cards in room 2 on the Ice Tiger in order to refund. You will need slightly above 7k damage before NP at NP2, while at NP3 any face card will do the trick. Among the good 6-slot setups, I also want to mention this variation for Melt. This time no append skills are required, but instead you'll need your own Castoria and NP3 or higher Summer Melt for both damage and refund from overkill. In practice, since this time we lost Oberon raw NP charge, Melt needs high NP level to both deal damage and refund enough from overkill. Use any 2 face card in room 1 before NP to refund enough, and remember to switch out Bride before using Castoria skills, since you want that NP charge to be drained by Melt. Again, you can use secondary DPS to clear room 1, but losing a full damage support requires extremely high NP level for Melt this time. The best option remain the same, namely Ebby, Luvia and Ereshkigal. As the last one of the good 6-slot setups, we have of course a Melusine comp. From this point onwards we have only high party cost with a full lineup of 5-star servants, but I feel this particular comp deserves an higher rank than the following ones, since it requires no double support or DPS, no lowered append skills, and it works at MP1. So really, party cost aside, it can't get better than this. In practice, Melusine has so much charge and so much ramping damage that she doesn't need double Koyan like other Buster DPS. Hell, she doesn't even need to lower her first skill. To be fair, you should lower it anyway sooner or later, since it's more damage and charge, and in that case she doesn't even need a pend and she will clear all rooms at MP1. Yep, definitely fair and balanced. Please God, let one of the rank up for the 5-star Lancer be for Karna. Fix that cursed 25% NP charge. Moving on, we have Melusine nuke setup. If you have heard of the new Buster meta, you should know how this setup works by now. Still, I will put this setup on the low side, since there are cheaper alternatives even for the same Melusine, like with the previous setup, and those cheaper alternatives can take advantage from the free waiver that you can get from the free SSR ticket. So again, don't take the bad in the title as this is a bad setup, okay? It's just my way to give you a ranking for the farming comps, and this one is ranked lower than the previous one since it requires your own Koyanskaya. Next, as another bad 6-slot, I will put this one with Vritra and Morgan. It requires your own Castoria, but no lowered append, and it works even at MP1 for all DPS, with maybe some face cards needed. In practice, Vritra has not such a great NP refund like Melt or Percival, but she is a little better than Theon, so she needs a secondary DPS to deal with Room 1. Fortunately, she has the best damage in Room 3 among all AoE Arch DPS, since Ash has the Divine trait, so she can work even at MP1 without a third damage support. She may need some face cards in Room 3, but it's very consistent. Among the secondary DPS instead, Morgan provides Vritra with the NP charge and NP gain buff she needs to loop, buffing also her damage with her charisma buff. However, keep in mind that at MP1 you'll need face card to clear Room 1. Don't worry, it's very consistent thanks to all the attack buffs and the Buster first card bonus. We are closing round 2 with the worst 6-slot setup featuring Space Ishtar. In fact, if you have your own Castoria, Space Ishtar with lowered append and support Oberon can loop all 3 rooms, and she benefits a lot from Oberon MP damage multiplier for Room 3. However, she needs NP2 in order to refund enough in Room 2, requiring additionally even face cards on the Ice Tiger before NP, for at least 6.5k of damage. As a final note, there are other comps with Space Ishtar that use a secondary DPS to deal with Room 1, for example Ereshkigal and Morgan, as we have seen with the previous setups, but all these comps require very high MP level for Space Ishtar. We have finally reached the final and third round, and this rotation is definitely the easiest one to farm for both the single level 90 node and the level 90 plus mixed node, on top of being the most efficient one to farm, as you should remember if you have watched part 2 of my guide. Starting with the level 90 node, the casters in Room 1 and 2 make this one the ideal node for arts and quick loopers, since caster enemies gives the best NP refund. Secondly, the Saber enemy in Room 3 means that Berserkers will work as well as Riders for this node, both having to reach 100k neutral damage in Room 3. In particular, if you have cleared Lost Bell 6, Abetroth is the cheapest option for this node. You can also use neutral DPS loopers, in this case having to reach 150k damage in Room 3, but unfortunately no alter ego or lancer in this case, since they will need 200k natural damage in room 3. It's also worth mentioning that Doman can clear room 1 without any support, even at MP1, with no external charge required. Among the primary DPS, as I've anticipated, Avatroth is definitely the best choice, since she is technically free, doesn't require plug suit and can work with any other mystic code with only one lored skill. She doesn't even need MP5 to give you an idea. Sharing first place, Da Vinci Rider and Summer Musashi can work without plug suit at MP1. In second place we have Space Ishtar and Odysseus. Both can loop without order change, but NP2 is advised for damage. Space Ishtar in this case is just slightly better since she can use a lot of different mystic codes, unlike Odysseus. In third place we have all the DPS that require order change. Both Drake and Morgan work at MP1, using Doman to deal with the first room, while Okusai can loop all 3 rooms thanks to Oberon MP charge. However, even with the main attribute on Gilgamesh in room 3, she will need NP2 to deal enough damage. As the only 6-slot quick looping setup, we should give credit to Lancelot, that can loop from 0 using double Skadi plus Bride or Castoria. He needs a higher MP level to work, but being a permanent 4-star, he can be a cheaper option than the previous ones. In regards to the supports, unsurprisingly Castoria still takes the number 1 spot, followed this time by Doman in second place. In third place we have Koyanskaya that works with basically all Bastard Looper DPS, with other notable mentions like Oberon and Skadi. Moving on to the level 90 plus mixed node, as you'll see in a moment, this one has the cheapest option for farming and also the largest number of possible variations, since there are a lot of AoE casters available in the game, most of which are very good farmers. Taking a look at the layout of enemies, the high HP mob in room 2, which by the way have both demonic and giant trait, requires either single target DPS or AoE DPS dealing with both room 2 and room 3. In particular, for room 3, Li Shuen has main trait, so Koyanskaya helps a lot with damage, but unfortunately the special damage buff doesn't work in room 2. There are mainly 3 ways to farm this node. The best way is of course to use Caster Q and Buster Loop all 3 rooms. Otherwise, you can use a single target DPS to clear room 2, that can also buff and possibly charge the primary AoE DPS looping in room 1 and 3. Finally, we can also use Nito to loop in room 2 and room 3 with an AoE DPS clearing room 1. As you can see by checking the ranking on the left side of the screen, for this node we have a lot more options than the previous ones. Just to be precise, I've put Gong in the number 1 spot together with Caster Q, since he is the cheapest option among all caster DPS, and basically you only need the top supports to make his setups work, so no need for specific DPS. Given that supports are top tier in this game, chances are that you have all of them instead of one specific DPS. In any case, I don't like needing an extra party slot, even if overall the total party cost is lower compared to other options in this list, so you will find Gone comps at the bottom of the ranking. Starting instead from the top, we find of course Caster Q Buster Looping setup. This one definitely deserves a special rank for itself, since 1 doesn't require order change, so you can use an extra slot for bond farming in the backline, 2 doesn't need any lowered append skill, and 3 he has the lowest party cost among all available setups, since we don't need plug suit support and Caster Q is a 3-star servant. In practice, Caster Q has jumped to top tier DPS together with Melusine, thanks to the new Buster meta. There are only two possible problems for this comp. First of all, he is story locked, so those that didn't roll on his recent rate up will have him at low MP levels. Fortunately, if you didn't burn him by mistake, you should have him at MP1 from Fuyuki. Secondly, his third skill rank up, which enable Buster Looping, is locked behind Lost Well 6 completion, or at least reaching an advanced part of the story. And keep in mind that Lost Well 6 is the longest story we have gotten so far, which was released very recently on NA, so I think there will be a decent amount of players like myself that have yet to unlock his rank up. Personally, I have limited free time and I want to enjoy both the story and the boss fights at my leisure. As a final note, if you can unlock 2 level 1 append, you can use other 10% charge mystic codes like True Eater. You can also avoid a lore on Caster QS1 by leveling his append, but keep in mind that you'll want to spend it in the future. Finally, if you can't unlock his append skills since you have him at low MP levels, you can use Mage Association mystic code, but then damage will be a problem. In other words, if your caster Q has low MP level, you should consider switching to these 2 other comps. You will need order change just like with all other comps coming up next, but among them this one has the lowest party cost, with caster Q being a 3-star servant. On top of your own Koyaskaya, this time you'll also need Waver or Oberon respectively, but at least no append skills are required. Do note that caster Q at MP1 has low damage in room 2, since Koyan main trait power mod doesn't work there, so he'll need face card and crits in order to clear it. In other words, you will still use Koyan skill 2 in room 2, but this time for the star bomb. The Oberon setup of course has the best chance to work at MP1 without needing face cards. Moving on, there is just one more comp that can match the lowest party cost of caster Q Buster Looping comp with order change. That is Space Ishtar Premium Looping comp. In fact, it requires your own Castoria, 2 lowered append skills, and more importantly NP5 Space Ishtar for damage with a minimum requirement of NP2 for refund. So yeah, in practice, Space Ishtar at high MP level can match the low party cost of Q looping setup with Plug Suit. This is however a very expensive comp since it requires 2 lowered appends, one of which is for David. And let's be honest, he isn't exactly a servant that you use a lot for farming. In this particular case, he is just the cheapest option with party buffs to help Ishtar damage. Furthermore, even at MP5, Ishtar can fail to kill Li Shuen in room 3, so you'll definitely need face cards if you have her at lower MP level. The only positive note is that at MP2 she will refund enough and clear everything aside Li Shuen, against which at least Castoria will have class advantage. The last one of the best 6-slot setups features Nitocris looping in room 2 and room 3. Just like the previous setup, this one requires your own Castoria and 2 lowered append skills, with a total party cost that is just increased by 1 compared to the previous one, given that we are using 2 4-star DPS. Both Nitocris and Caster Gil will need the NP2 for damage and most importantly to unlock append skills. In particular, you will need at least NP2 and Bond 9 to unlock mana loading. On the flip side, they are both permanent 4 stars, so reaching NP2 should be easier than reaching NP5 Space Ishtar, for example. In practice, Nitocris is the only AoE art DPS that can loop in room 2 and room 3, since refund is not a problem for her. Instead, she needs help for damage, for which Caster Gil is the best option. As I said before, you'll need at least NP2 for damage and to unlock their append skills. Both of them must be lowered, but you'll want to do it anyway eventually, given their value. Remember in fact that caster Gilgamesh will have a rank up, which will turn him in the superior Helena version for arts farming comps. You should also note that there are secondary DPS that can work without append skills, namely Sanzang and Cersei for room 2 and Helena for room 1. All of them can replace caster Gilgamesh, but very high MP levels are required to deal enough damage, in particular for Nitocris, since you'll be missing caster Gilgamesh buffs. Moving on to the good 6-slot setup, let's first cover all the arts ones. The cheapest one uses caster Sig. It has a lower party cost, with Sig being a 4-star servant, and no append skills are required. However, you'll need of course your own Artoria, but most importantly you'll need face guard in room 3, since Sig can't quite reach enough damage. In practice, Sig is the real free-to-player option for this node, since caster Q is story locked. While he loops fine thanks to Sanzang and Big Game buff, his damage in room 3, as I said, is low, so you'll need face guards in order to kill Li Shuen. However, you will have a full caster team with class advantage, so it's doable. If you want more damage, you'll need to increase the rarity of the primary DPS. Namely, in a decreasing order of damage, we have Caster Da Vinci, Anastasia, Scheherazade, Murasaki and Space Ishtar. On the screen you can check the suggested NP level in order to deal enough damage in room 3. Just 2 more things to keep in mind. Number 1, while Caster Da Vinci can work at MP1, she will need lowered mana loading. And number 2, while Anastasia, Murasaki and Space Ishtar will need higher MP levels, since they have party buffs they can work with MP1 Sanzang. So in practice the total MP levels required in the party is lowered by 1. Speaking of Sanzang, she is definitely the best choice as secondary DPS to deal with room 2, since she can help the primary art AoE DPS for both looping and damage. You can use Abby with Space Ishtar, but this specific comp requires a very high MP level for both of them, so I really don't recommend it. Next we have the good Buster 6-slot setup, featuring Caster Nero, which is on rate up for this event. This comp has high party cost, using only 5-star servants, requires your own Koyaskaya, 1 lowered append skill and maybe some face cards in room 3. In practice, Nero caster has the best damage in room 3 compared to all other AoE casters we have listed before, mainly because Li Shuen in room 3 has main trait, so Koyan skill 2 really helps a lot. For this reason you can give Sanzang one of Koyan Buster buffs to help her clear room 2. Since face cards may be needed in room 3, you should keep the second Koya skill 2 for turn 3. That way you will have a good number of stars to crit with. Since on top of Koyan Star Bomb, you also get star passively from Seas and actively from Sanzang NP. Moving on with the bad Gong 6-slot setups. As I said before, I have put them at the bottom of the ranking, since they require 1 extra party slot, so basically you will bond farm with supports and niche 3-star servants only, which really isn't an efficient way to use all the bonds you will get from farming the lottery. However, keep in mind that overall these comps have lower party cost, since a 2-star and a 3-star servants combined cost less than a single 4-star servant like Sig. In any case, you will need your own Artoria and Oberon in order to use these setups, but fortunately no lowered append skills are required. You know what Gong strategy is, so I won't bother explaining it. Instead, let's focus on the secondary DPS. To keep the party cost as lowest as possible, you have 2 options. The first one is David, which has special damage in room 2, given the giant trait, and can also buff Gong damage with his charisma. Not that it's needed anyway for Gong. Secondly, you can use Lu Bu, which is the strongest low rarity nuke available to us. Of course, we have other free options like Summer Jalter for example, but all of them are of a higher rarity, so it's up to you and your party cost. In last place, as the worst 6-slot comps, we have variations of the previous comps that replace the limited Oberon with the permanent waiver. However, to make up for the difference in damage buffs, you will need secondary DPS of higher rarity, meaning you can reach a high party cost with only 5-star Servant plus Gong. In particular, you will need to bring Mash in the remaining slot, so basically you'll be bond farming with supports and Gong, making this comp the less ideal one for bond farming. The only saving grace of this comp is not needing any append skill. In practice, focusing on the secondary DPS available, of course Sanzang is again the best choice to deal with room 2, since she has the highest damage. She can also technically help Gong with both looping and damage, but it doesn't need it. Abby can work too, but her damage is on the low side in MP1, so face card may be needed in room 2. Betty is the cheapest option, but being story locked, not all of you will have him at high MP levels. At least MP3 is advised for just a bit of face cards in room 2. Finally, Luvia is another cheaper option, but at least MP3 again is advised for damage. This concludes the third and final part of my guide for Grand Nero Fest. It surely ended up being way longer than what I expected at the beginning, but hey, if you are used to my channel by now, you know that I like in-depth guides. I hope all 3 parts have been useful to you, and if that's the case, please let me know by leaving a comment or a like and subscribing to the channel. I basically do these guides in my ever so limited free time, so it's really your support that keeps me going. Anyway, that's all for today, guys. Good luck with your Lotto C drops for Nero Fest, and I hope that, unlike me, you'll have quartz left for the coming summer event. Be sure to keep your eyes peeled for the exclusive NA campaign that you are getting, since it could be something as big as 2 blue caster gems. Enough with the salt regarding yesterday's stream. I wish you a good summer holiday, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.